Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this webinar. My name is David Hanlon. I am the Secretary of the IEC Conformity Assessment Board. And this webinar is titled Kaizen, Better Standards Through User Feedback. Its objective is to discuss how integrating practical feedback from regular standards users into the standards development process can greatly improve the consistency of results coming from those standards. To help with this webinar, we have a number of experts that will participate in a panel session at the end of the presentation. We have Trond Solli from Nemco in Norway, we have Wolfram Zeiss from the IEC in Switzerland, and we have Sandy Butterfield from Boulder Wind Consulting in the US. During the presentation, you are all invited to write comments, or rather write questions, and send them either during the presentation or after the presentation. And the panel session, the panelists will then reply to your questions and give you valuable information that is important to you. The motivation for this webinar was to raise awareness of and to promote the Administrative Circular AC 31/2017 that was produced by a joint SMB-CAB working group, and which explains the process for feeding back practical information about IEC standards from participants in the IEC Conformity Assessment Systems to the IEC TCSCs that developed the standards. Unfortunately, the Administrative Circular tends to put people to sleep. For this reason, we'll try to make it a little more interesting by telling a few stories about how things get better with constructive feedback. The main message is listen to your customers, understand their difficulties, and improve your deliverable. I hope you'll find it interesting and informative. Now, I'd like you to ask yourself this question. How do you make purchasing decisions? How do we all make purchasing decisions? The answer is we all make purchasing decisions based on confidence. Either we buy brands we know and trust, or we buy from retailers or suppliers that we know and trust, or we buy on trusted advice. Of course, we also buy on price. And on the issue of price, sometimes we are faced with a choice. There may be two identical products, one from a brand we know and one from a brand that we don't know. As far as we can tell, the two products are the same, but the unknown brand is cheaper. So how do we decide? Well, if it's a low-cost, low-risk item, then we often just take on the risk ourselves. But when it's a higher cost item, such as a large flat screen television, we will normally purchase it from a retailer we know and trust. Since we know and trust the retailer, we know that if there is a problem, it's the retailer who will solve it. Either they will repair the product, exchange the product, take back the product against a voucher, or simply take back the product and refund us. It's therefore not us, but rather the retailer who takes on the risk for us of the unknown brand. But how does the retailer know which products to propose from manufacturers and suppliers that no one has ever heard of? How does the retailer manage the risk that they take on for us? The question is always the same, only this time it's directed to the retailers. How do retailers make purchasing decisions? And the answer is the same. They make purchasing decisions based on confidence. They purchase from suppliers they know and trust and have worked with in the past, or from suppliers they themselves have audited, or from suppliers that have been audited by reputable and competent third parties. Then, of course, they back this up with negotiated commercial contracts. In fact, this is how most purchasing decisions are made. They are made on confidence. Whether it's you and me, or companies, or governments, purchasing decisions are made on confidence. The level of confidence needed will mostly depend on three main factors: the quality of the item, the price tag of the item, and the risk of the item. Ensuring a minimum level of quality or performance will usually depend on conformity with a standard. If the price is small, then the financial risk is small and can easily be accepted. As the price increases, however, so does the financial risk, and thus the need for greater confidence. If the product itself is risky, or it is used in a risky environment, then a higher level of confidence is needed. This boils down essentially to two elements: quality and risk. How do we assure quality in products and services, and how do we manage the risk of products and services? For quality, the world's best practice is the use of international standards. But standards alone are not sufficient. Confidence comes from assurance that the standards have been applied. Therefore, for risk management, the world's best practice is the use of conformity assessment to demonstrate conformity to the standard. As the risk increases, stronger levels of conformity assessment are needed. The level of conformity assessment should be appropriate to cover the level of the associated risk. Standards with specific quality and performance requirements for products and services are of little value by themselves. Value is only created when it can be demonstrated that the requirements have been fulfilled. Conformity assessment is used to demonstrate that conformity has been achieved to the standard. In this way, standards and conformity assessment are like two sides of a coin. Neither side has value without the other side. Only together do standards and conformity assessment create value. Conformity assessment is often the neglected side of the value coin. It's neglected in the sense that it tends to take quite a distant backseat position relative to standards. People tend to know and understand standards, but they know little about conformity assessment and understand it even less. Yet standards alone have little value and need confirmation through conformity assessment to create value. As we all know, for products and services, standards are useful for creating a baseline of minimum safety, quality, and performance. Hence the term substandard, to communicate low or even dangerous quality. All of this is also true for conformity assessment. Conformity assessment is essentially a service which, like all services, can benefit from being standardized. Conformity assessment is testing, calibration, inspection, certification, and so on. Different types of conformity assessment can be performed by different parties. Conformity assessment can be performed by the manufacturer or the supplier themselves. This is called first-party conformity assessment. In this case, a manufacturer or supplier makes a declaration of conformity, which is known as a supplier's declaration of conformity, or SDOC. Conformity assessment can be performed by the customer or the end user. For example, in industry, this is done for incoming quality control. This is called second-party conformity assessment. And we all do this each time we purchase a product, take it home, and test it. We are doing informal second-party conformity assessment, usually not to formal requirements, but rather to our own personal satisfaction. Then there is, of course, conformity assessment performed by independent professional organizations. They are independent of the manufacturer and supplier and independent of the customer and end user. They are like a judge in a court case giving an impartial decision. This is third-party conformity assessment and often involves certification. IEC is best known as an international standards development organization. IEC mainly develops international technical standards for electrotechnical products. But IEC is also very active on the conformity assessment side. IEC and ISO are sister organizations, and together they jointly develop the ISO IEC 17000 series of international standards for conformity assessment. But unlike ISO, IEC does more than only develop standards. IEC has two pillars. It develops international standards, and it also operates global conformity assessment services. The IEC Global CA Systems create a framework into which professional certification bodies, testing laboratories, inspection bodies, auditing bodies, and so on from around the world come to work together in a team structure. IEC does not do testing or certification itself. Rather, it is the professional bodies that do this. This is very similar to the way in which standards are developed by both IEC and ISO. Neither organization actually writes technical standards themselves. Rather, it is the subject matter experts from around the world who come and participate in the standards development process who actually write the standards. On the standards development side, the framework is determined by the ISO IEC directives, which describe the standards development process. On the conformity assessment side, the framework is based on layers of rules. Starting first at the very top layer are the IEC statutes and rules of procedure. Then come the harmonized basic rules for the CA systems, which describe the rules for the CA systems membership and management structure. Then there are the CA systems rules of procedure that describe the scope of work and how the CA systems operate. And lastly, there are the operational documents that get into the details of the work. These document layers are very important because they give input and ownership of the rules where they need to be. It is not a top-down structure, but rather a buy-in structure. As we've seen, the IEC CA systems are membership and rules-based organizations. This is important because it is the members that write the rules and they must abide by those rules. The same is particularly true of how the certification bodies and testing laboratories do their work within the CA systems. They come together in dedicated committees to discuss the standards that they are testing and certifying, and when needed, they decide and document a common understanding and a harmonized interpretation of those standards. When necessary, they also write precise testing regimes and methodologies to ensure consistent testing. All of these are written down into operational documents, or ODs. Then peer assessment is used on two levels. On the first level, peer assessment is used to check if a testing laboratory or a certification body is competent to do the work that is required. Do they have the correct testing equipment? Do they have qualified personnel? Do they have the appropriate management processes? This is similar to an accreditation audit. On the second level, peer assessment is used to check if testing laboratories and certification bodies also know and understand the CA system operating rules. And more than this, peer assessment actually checks if those operating rules are being applied. The IEC CA activities are all about teamwork. They are about building confidence between all the team members, combining common understanding and interpretation of the standards with harmonized testing methodologies, and then by using peer assessment to ensure that these common work practices are being applied, create such a high level of confidence that the certification body in its own country will recognize the test reports from a testing laboratory in another country, or will recognize the certificates from another certification body in another country, and in both cases will issue their own certificate or national mark and allow the goods or products into their own country. And in so doing, they take on the risk of those test results or certificates from elsewhere, and they take on some of the risk in their own country of those foreign goods or products. This is called mutual recognition of conformity assessment results. But mutual recognition of conformity assessment results only works because of confidence that every participant is doing the work in the same way. They know that if they did the same testing on the same product, they would get the same result. The real value that the IEC CA systems create is to get very different, widely separate, often competing testing laboratories and certification bodies from all over the world to operate in the same way to ensure the same consistent results on the same products against the same standards. No standard is perfect. Standards can often be understood in different ways. Often the standards leave the choice of how to determine a particular characteristic to the experience of the testing laboratory. And in any single testing laboratory, they may always test in a consistent way, but that way may be quite different from another laboratory. In easy situations, the results may always be the same, but in critical situations, results can be quite different. In order for a certification body in one country to recognize the test results of a laboratory in a different country, and then to take on the risk of the tested product by allowing them to be sold in their own country, they need to be sure not only of the easy results, but also of the critical results. They need to be sure that all the results are the same as they would get themselves. This is why the testing laboratories and certification bodies that participate in the IEC CA systems invest a lot of time and effort in discussing the standards in order to converge on an agreed understanding and a common interpretation of the standards and a harmonized testing methods. Decision sheets are the mechanism within the IEC CA systems that the testing laboratories and certification bodies use to communicate their agreed understanding, common interpretation of the standards, and their harmonized testing methods. The participating testing laboratories and certification bodies and so on come together in dedicated committees to discuss the standards that they are testing and certifying, and when needed, they create decision sheets to ensure clarity. This is a value-adding process. It creates standardized understanding and application of the standards. The notion of Kaizen, or continuous improvement, rose to fame in the 1980s because of the great success of the Toyota production system, from which other terms such as just-in-time manufacturing and Kanban pool manufacturing were also derived. Each of these terms were also made popular in the 1990s with the advent of lean manufacturing concepts and Six Sigma quality practices, and so on. And frankly, continuous improvement makes a lot of common sense. Another important concept is that of captive and key customers. Captive customers are those customers who are locked in to a supplier. They are customers that have no other choice for their supplier. In this case, a supplier is at liberty to treat a captive customer either well or badly. The supplier risks very little either way. On the other hand, a key customer is an important customer for a supplier. They are a customer who takes a large percentage of their product. They are a customer who consistently creates value with the supplier's product. These are customers that the supplier must listen to in order to keep them as a customer, and must listen to them in order to continue to fulfill their needs and to keep these key customers satisfied. Are IEC CA systems captive or key customers for IEC technical and subcommittees? This is the question. To try to answer this question, let's have a look at some statistics. The IEC standards catalogue has about 9,000 standards. Most of these are technical standards with testable requirements in them. The IEC CA Systems use about 1/3 of these standards, that is about 3,000 standards, and they issue more than 100,000 certificates each year based on those standards. By any market benchmark, these statistics would clearly indicate a key customer. On the other hand, statistics show that for the 3,000 standards that are used by the IEC CA Systems, there are about 900 published decision sheets. This is about 30% of those standards, and it is hoped that this percentage cannot be extrapolated and is not representative of all IEC standards. It does mean, however, that the IEC CA Systems need to spend a lot of time and effort ensuring that the standards can be understood and applied consistently. The IEC CA System participants accept to spend time and money to improve their supplier's product because they are locked in. They are treated, and in these circumstances must behave, as captive customers. But for the IEC technical and subcommittees, these decision sheets should be seen as a unique source for improvement. These decision sheets are derived directly from the practical experience of hundreds of professional testing laboratories and certification bodies. This is a wealth of information to understand and use these standards and to improve them. The IEC CA Systems and their participants need to be recognized as and treated as key customers by the IEC technical and subcommittees. It is for this reason that the Joint CAB and SMB Working Group created the Administrative Circular AC 31/2017. This AC sets out the procedure for feeding back valuable practical information from the CA Systems to the IEC technical and subcommittees. And it describes what the technical and subcommittees should do with this information. It also describes some best business practices on how suppliers and key customers, in this case the IEC technical and subcommittees and the IEC CA Systems, should work together to continually improve the standards and their consistent application. The Administrative Circular is quite simple. It has 4 parts to it. Part 1 is simply an introduction which references the various SMB decisions that led to this Administrative Circular. The relevant SMB decisions are necessary because this AC is mostly an instruction to the IEC technical and subcommittees, which are, of course, under the responsibility of the SMB. Part 2 is background information, somewhat like has already been described by this webinar. I certainly won't read all of this to you, you can do that yourselves, but I will give you the key elements. It says that IEC CA Systems are key customers for the IEC technical and subcommittees, and that the feedback from such key customers is valuable information that should be taken on board by the technical and subcommittees. It says that it should be a goal of the technical and subcommittees to develop standards that produce consistent results when applied by any party. It also says that in some cases this feedback process is already working well, and this can be used as a model for other TCSCs. Part 3 is a list of best practice actions for the IEC CA Systems and for the IEC technical committees and subcommittees. It describes the need for both the CA Systems and the TCSCs to be involved in each other's work, and specifically that the IEC TC experts should have the opportunity to be involved in the discussions during the development of decision sheets. Also, that the decision sheets should be transmitted to the TCSCs for their action to clarify or correct the standard. The underlying goal is to try to avoid all of these time-consuming discussions after publication of the standard by having the key customers involved early on and getting the standard right from the beginning. Part 4 describes the feedback process for the decision sheet from the IEC CA Systems to the IEC technical and subcommittees, and also describes the feedback process for the report and decision by the IEC technical committee to the IEC CA system. It is important that there is feedback in both directions. When a decision sheet is sent to a TCSC secretariat, it is important and good manners to immediately acknowledge its receipt. Then there is a process of getting the appropriate experts to review and evaluate the decision sheet, and then report back to the CA system as to what will be done about the decision sheet. The administrative circular specifies deadlines for such actions. For example, if the decision sheet is relatively simple and can be treated quickly, a report and decision as to how the information will be treated should be returned within 4 weeks of receiving the decision sheet. However, if the decision sheet requires substantial discussion, then a reply should be returned to the CA system within 4 weeks after an appropriate face-to-face meeting by the appropriate experts. In either case, it is the TCSC that decides what to do about the information in the DC, in the decision sheet, and they have basically 2 choices: either to reject that information, but then they would need to document valid reasons for this, or to adopt the information and state how it will be integrated into the standard. Once again, to create value, standards and conformity assessment must work together. Value is only created when it can be demonstrated that the requirements have been fulfilled. Conformity assessment is used to demonstrate that conformity has been achieved to the standard. Greatest value is created when the conformity assessment results are believable, no matter from where in the world they come. Conformity assessment results are believable when they are consistent, no matter from where they come in the world. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. And I will ask our panelists to come back online if possible. But before doing that, I would just like, something I should have said at the beginning was that you now, all those that are listening, have the opportunity to send in questions to the panelists about the presentation that you've just seen, or any other questions you have. Please write them and send them to us, and we will reply to them as best we can. So I'm waiting for our panelists to come back online. Wolfram, I believe
Yep.
you are. Okay, maybe Wolfram, if you can just introduce yourself quickly to.
Okay, I will. My name is Wolfram Zeitz. I'm the Deputy Secretary of 2 of our 4 conformity assessment systems at IEC. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the IEC EE for electrical equipment and components, and for the IEC RE for the renewable energies.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to hand over to Sandy that we have clear order and not talk across each other.
Okay, so Sandy.
Hi.
Can you just describe who you are and yeah.
Yes. I'm the chairman of IEC RE and formerly the chair of TC88, which is the technical committee responsible for all wind energy standards. So I've been helping to develop this system for some time and been involved with many of the, in fact, most of the standards developed for wind energy throughout my career.
Right, thank you. Trond.
Yes, hello there. My name is Trond Solly. I'm representing or coming from NEMCO in Norway, which is one of the leading players in the IEC CB scheme. And I've been involved with the CB scheme for actually 30 years by now. I'm also formerly chairman of the NEK, which is the Norwegian National Committee in the IEC. So I also have my foot into the standardization side. Thank you.
Okay, so just to get things started, could I maybe ask Wolfram to begin with, explaining how in practice in the ICEE CB scheme, how it operates, how the CTL, which is the Committee of Testing Laboratories, how they actually come together and develop the decision sheets in a practical way.
Yeah, okay. Usually CTL decision sheets are initiated based on a request of one of the participants or members. That means there's a clear indication that there is in reality a different interpretation found on the marketplace on a certain requirement of the standard. Based on this inquiry, the CTL will decide which of its expert task forces, the ETFs, will handle this inquiry based on their expertise, and the selected expert task force then will discuss the subject and come up with a proposal for a CTL decision. And once this decision is ratified by the CTL, it will be also presented to the management committee for a final enforcement.
Okay. I just remind everybody who's listening in, if you have questions, please write them down, send them to us, and we will reply to them. We have one question. First question, I will just put this to the probably to Trond and to Wolfram. It says, could you please tell me the number of countries that will accept the CB reports?
This is an interesting question, because basically there are some 54 member body countries, 54 countries, but the scope is different. In some countries they have a very wide scope. In other words, they would accept CB certificates for a large number of standards, while in some countries they only accept it for some standards. And it largely is attached to when they have a certification body who is an operator in the scheme, what is the scope that they have selected for their acceptance, and also for the ability to do the certification, their initial certification. So this varies around the world, but basically it is 54 different countries.
Yeah, and to pick up and add a little bit on what Trond was saying, since the actual recognition process is in the hands of the certification bodies, not the countries. It's the certification bodies, the NCB, who recognize the result from another certification body, and they issue their national mark or their own certification mark on it. So it's a recognition from a certification body to a certification body. And on top of this, there is an uncertain number of countries in which IEC ECB certificates and test reports are accepted, even though they are not member. What Trond was saying, that was the number of member bodies and member countries. However, since this system is well known and has a good reputation, there are many countries who do this on a voluntary basis. However, since this is voluntary, we don't have clear statistics on that, because they don't need to tell us in advance if they do recognition or not.
Right, so you have the 53 countries that are members of the IEC, but you could have many more countries that are not members, but that are still recognizing the CB and accepting the CB reports and certificates.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, we have another decision, or rather another question. It says IEC TC5. Oh, okay, this is it's Jürgen Havman from TC5. It says, are there any decision sheets for standards on functional safety and it talks about IEC 61508 and 61511. Now, I think this is an opportunity maybe to say where the decision sheets are and how you actually see what decision sheets there are for standards. And maybe that would be Trond or Wolfram to reply to that, at least on the EE website.
Well, yeah, I suppose you can maybe answer that one, Wolfram. I mean, functional safety is a relatively new area, and it's basically connected to industrial automation. And I know that we have already discussions on the technical level there, but to which extent we do have decision sheets, I don't really know. But you may know that, Wolfram.
Yeah, I can tell where to find the decision sheets on the website, but I would need to run throughout check offline to this to find out if there is some. To my knowledge, at the moment, there is no decision yet directly related to functional safety, but I would need to verify this on the website first, and that would take some time. In general, the decisions are public available. You just need to go to the IEC website and go to the committees. And no matter which of these committees, most likely the predominant choices would be CMC, CTL, or PAC, because that's the most active one in terms of decisions. You simply click on that committee, and then you will have a submenu which guides you to a tab where you can open the decision sheets. And this is in a database where you can search for different kind of keywords. So that's the way how you can find them. But to look for decisions to a specific topic and to a specific standard, I would recommend to send us an email to the Secretariat, and we try to help with that, because it would take me now a little bit time, a couple of minutes, to filter accordingly and to double check and triple check that we did not miss any kind of keyword, to ensure that we really get all the possible decision sheets for a certain topic.
Certainly, everything is available, publicly available on the website, and so it's just a matter of learning to navigate the website to find those things. Trond, you wanted to say something?
No, well, I just checked, and there's a CTL working group number 7 on this industrial automation equipment, which may be where you can find something.
Okay. Sandy, I have a question for you. With IEC RE, does IEC RE have the similar sort of mechanism to discuss the standards and to document a common understanding and application of the standards?
Yes, they do. In fact, it's one of the important things that's been developed between the IEC RE sectors, when we have wind energy, photovoltaics, and marine energy involved with IEC RE. And they have their corresponding technical committees, TC88, TC82, and TC114. And we have established liaisons and a fluid communication that allows us to, first of all, write a clarification sheet that, or a clarification of a particular standard, and send it over to TC88, for example, for confirmation that we've interpreted the standard correctly. But I think that you bring up a very important point. I think for IEC RE, we are certifying very large, complicated systems that can't be tested in a laboratory. They can't be tested to their design specifications or design limits. And I think the important thing to recognize here is that experts have to interpret the design documentation and test results that basically confirm the design assumptions. And so it's very much a process of evaluating the or expert evaluation of design documentation rather than test results which can be compared in a very precise way from a laboratory. So it depends very much on the interpretation of the experts of the standard. And so interpretation is the key thing, and it is the reason that we've actually developed the IECRE, because we found that multiple certification bodies interpret these standards differently, and hence resulted in certificates that really meant different things. And so this is the only system, the IECRE is the only system that's public, in a sense that all of the participants, member bodies, and customers and end users can actually take part in the development of the rules, interpretations, and so on. So it's a truly transparent process. And I think from the standpoint of acceptance of stakeholders such as large financial institutions or government agencies, to assure that the products and installations have been certified or interpreted to those standards correctly, it really requires this kind of a system. Sorry for the elaboration.
It's all right, very interesting. But as you say, RE is not necessarily not only testing specific products, but also systems and evaluation systems of products, that sort of thing. So it requires a lot more interpretation and experience, and that's what you need to find, to make sure you have common ground and get common results for the same things by different people, in fact.
Yes, absolutely. And what we have found is that unless the end user or the people who are actually accepting the certifications have a voice in the process, first of all, they generally don't understand the value of it, and so they end up using their own experts or to do evaluations, and that leads to even more differences in interpretation. So to harmonize these interpretations and I think get much higher quality, I think it's very important to have a very transparent process where all stakeholders are actively engaged. And for wind energy, I've watched our industry grow over the last 40 years and recognize that standards have played a key role in breaking down the cost and really improving the reliability of the system. Standards have played a key role there. I personally have been involved with that, and I was a standards naysayer in the 80s when we first developed our first wind turbines, and out of that experience, I realized that standards really have to be instituted in order to develop baseline understandings of how a turbine is supposed to operate, and use that as a stepping stone to make the incremental improvements that David was speaking about earlier. So very, very important for nascent industries, and I think for mature industries that need a very solid foundation for building a reliable infrastructure for our energy systems.
Thank you, Sandy. So are there any more questions? I'm not seeing anybody giving us questions at the moment. Maybe I can take a question from this morning's webinar and give that. There was a question concerning decision sheets and the fact that standards are not free, but decision sheets are free. And the question was, should decision sheets actually be linked to the standards, and should be something, an added value that people have to pay for? Maybe I will get some comments back on the online from our viewers or now our auditors. But what is generally your opinion on this, Sandy or Trond?
Well, I think connecting the standard to the decision sheet, it's a good idea, but it may be a practical problem. Surely to attach the decision sheet or something like that, I think would be inconceivable. But to actually make a reference to the fact that there exist decision sheets would be maybe possible. The problem, of course, is that things are not static. They are alive, and when standards are being coming out in new editions, new amendments, and of course also the decision sheets has to be then also updated accordingly. So there's quite a job to do that. So the question is who will be prepared to do it? I don't know, but certainly it would be nice to have that have such an arrangement.
Do you think that the decision sheets should have a cost in the same way that the standards do, or do you think they should be linked free of charge?
Well, the decision sheets are basically meant for the operators in the schemes or in the systems. So that's why they are free of charge, because they are intended, to be used amongst those people. But on the other hand, it's also found that it's very useful for people in general to have those sheets. And since it really doesn't have a cost to produce them, because it's made within the committee, that's why it's free. And whether anybody think there will be a way to make money, I don't know, but certainly if we keep them as it is, decision sheets free, fine, and then the standards may be considering to refer to them. I think that would be the best option here.
Sandy, do you have an opinion?
Well, my opinion is that they shouldn't cost. I think that they're very important for for the certification bodies and the end users to understand how these standards are being interpreted, and they should be retired. In the IEC system, these interpretation sheets, or I won't call them interpretation sheets, we call them clarification sheets, are essentially notifications that go into the in basket for the technical committees to address. There's a short-term loop that makes sure that these are valid kind of interpretations from the TC, and then but then there's a longer-term loop that the technical committees take to actually incorporate these clarifications into the standard. I think operationally, the certification bodies have to be able to respond very quickly, really within a matter of days sometimes, to these interpretations. And so it's very necessary for them to be able to say, this is how we all agree, we the certification bodies are going to interpret the standard until the technical committees have updated the standard. And so that operational information really has to be accessible by all of the certification bodies. And then the technical committees, sometimes it takes multiple years to update a standard. They will take that, and then when the interpretation sheets, and when they've incorporated them, they'll retire that, and the interpretation sheet will go away. If you charged for that, then it would be something that's hardly static. It's really a dynamic document. So I'd recommend that it not be a charged thing, but it recognized as just that, something that's hopefully temporary thing until the next update of the standard.
I personally entirely agree. There was another question this morning that I'd like to raise, and that is that we had I think a secretary from one of the TCs who said he was not very aware of this administrative circular that had been created and circulated. And he was saying, how can we actually spread this information about this important feedback that can make the IEC standards better and allow them to be applied more consistently throughout the world. And some of the things we discussed were that this webinar that is being produced right now could actually, well, it is actually recorded, and it could be used as a training tool for TC, SC chairs, secretaries, and experts. That it could be also, so it could be part of the general training that the standards development side of the IEC gives to its the standards experts coming in and writing the standards. And I think this would be a very useful tool. I think also the technical officers of the IEC, they have an opportunity at the plenary meetings for TCSCs to maybe also give this information about this important information that's being fed back. Again, it's key customer information. And you know, if it helps to make the IEC standards better, and as I said, that they can then be applied more consistently around the world, they can only benefit everybody. What would be your opinion, Trond, on this way forward?
Well, first of all, I think that it is not in all cases that the decision sheet really deals with stuff in the standard. It may be decisions on not necessarily interpretation of the standard, but it's decisions on how to do things, under the umbrella of the standard. So I don't think it is very consistent need, to do that. Yes, on a selective basis, when there is a typical decision that is relevant for the standard maker, then that's when we should focus, and that's where we put the energy to try to get these people together and resolve these things. Certainly, there are many decisions which are maybe not really relevant for the standards people, and then also I know that some standards, I mean, certain points in the standards, you may have a choice. So then the decision sheet is really to make that choice for the people who are testing, so that we all do the same thing if we want to accept each other's test results. But
yeah,
maybe
I was just going to say that those are very good points, because it's a little bit the difference between what needs to be in a standard and what needs to be conformity assessment. Which was exactly the webinar we had in March this year, which explains a little bit the reasons why there shouldn't be conformity assessment, or what type of conformity assessment can actually be in standards and what shouldn't be in standards, and the reasons for that. So that's also something that if people are interested about, to have a look at the IEC Academy website and look up the webinar that was held in March, and learn about what conformity assessment should and shouldn't be in IEC standards and why. It's an interesting webinar as well, I hope. So since we have no more questions and we're coming towards the end of our time, I just ask Sandy or Trond if you have anything more to say.
I have something I'd like to say. I think we've concentrated on decision sheets here, but I think, which I think is very important and sort of central to the functioning of the standards committees and the certification bodies. But I think that it's important to recognize that, at least from the IECRE standpoint, the end users are the ones who ultimately benefit from this system. And it's unique in the sense that this is the only system that I know of that they can all participate in and understand the core principles. If they don't use a system like this, then they really are saddled with doing their own interpretation of the standards, and therein lies the problem of interpretation. And I think that they have a unique opportunity to participate in a system that's truly transparent and leads to harmonization of these interpretations. There's so many interpretations that are done by the experts when they evaluate a design of a wind turbine or a solar installation, that it's very easy for them to simply miss key points and then not achieve the kind of reliability or cost impact that really is important to regulators and financial investors. So in that sense, these decision sheets, of course, are a very important core element of that. But I think if we step back a pace and say, what's the value? What's the real value to investors and the end user stakeholders? It is really the ability of having a totally transparent system where they all discuss and make sure that their needs are met by the certification process and the standards. That's what's unique about the IEC RE system.
Trond, you have a comment?
Well, just maybe mention one thing which was not covered, I think, by the presentation, but still very important when it comes to business decision sheets, and that's the proficiency test programs, or comparative test programs, where all the laboratories, such as in the CB scheme, are testing the same product according to a certain clause in the standard, and then you are then comparing the results. And of course, there are statistical diagrams made out of this to show to see if these are outliers or if they are within the acceptable limits. And these are also certainly a generator for making decisions. If you find that there's a big spread of these results, then that's also a source for making a decision. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the standard. So this is a very important part of the schemes, to have these proficiency tests carried out.
Wolfram, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, actually, Trond and Sandy mentioned most of it already. I would like to add one more point for consideration for the availability of decision sheets and interpretations. There's one aspect we also did not mention yet, and that's simply the fact there are quite a number of bodies and countries who recognize IEC ECB certificates, as one example, on a voluntary basis, because they are not participating themselves in the scheme, but they want to accept it. And for them, it's also very essential that they know under which conditions tests are performed and which interpretations are applied, because only then they can feel confident enough to accept that, even though they are not part of the, let's call it, family. Therefore, it is very important that things like that are public available and not an item to purchase.
Right, that's a good point to finish on, I think. So I'd like to thank everybody, all the audience, first of all, and then the panelists, second of all. Thank you very much for being with us and talking a little bit about this important subject and answering the questions. And I would like to thank you again and draw this webinar to a close. So thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody, and bye-bye.
Yep, thank you very much.